corruption, even within the parliamentary system. I think after a while, in a bid to reinvent itself, Nigeria says, oh, let's opt for presidential system. That's why I talked about value. The issue is not about whether the country is driving on a placable project. We have decided to be a crop of implacable people on the basis of our very warped understanding. The political class, as far as I am concerned, are more selfish, are more interested in their self than the Nigerian project. We are having a crop of people who just want to amass wealth, and they do not care whether the rest of the country suffers, how there is consequences. And so, even if you then begin to, get the younger generation, put them in a formal environment, train them, try to imbue in them the classicals of politics, of say this is how, to implement a very basic principles of governance. The issue would then be, Alero raised the point, family. What do parents tell their children at home, for example? If you take them to a formal environment, what happens possibly in the United States and some advanced democracies is that once a government recognizes some sets of people, young children, they remove them from the system. They take care of them from that level up to the point of throwing leadership at them. So you don't get them, you don't train them, they return home to the same environment, for example, that has other value systems. So they separate them, they take them out of the system, train them from primary school to high school, up to the university. The government continues to pay their bills, monitors them, send them to leadership institutions. But in Nigeria, we don't have all of that. So my problem, that was why I raised the issue of structures. What are our structural vision that we have for the country? Today, for example, we have moved away from the PDP to the APC, believing that once Nigerians are in need of change, really. They know what they want for themselves, but how do they get there as a people? That's the challenge that we have. Now we moved over from a set of political class to another set of political class, believing, who throw up the change mantra, believing that once you hear change, change itself will bring change. What people have forgotten is that the word change is abstract. You need characters with will and patriotism to implement the very fundamentals and the concept of change. Now that's where we've gotten it wrong, and that is where we still seem to be a people moving around in a circle, because until we get back to the very fundamentals of, I think it's patriotism that
is it a question of the Constitution? Because again, I'll go back to the former CBN governor who was quoted as saying the Nigerian Constitution makes economic development in the country impossible, as responsible for the huge recurrent expenditure in various tiers of government. This is a question of looking at the Constitution. Would the politicians who are meant to look at the Constitution in order to help cut costs, because they'll tell you, we're not the ones that fixed our emolument. These things are fixed by the Revenue Allocation and Mobilization, for short, RAMFAC. So would they be willing to look at the Constitution in such a way as to break down?
But they advocate certain increments here and there from time to time.
No, they'll also tell you that, I mean, in the 2016 budget, for instance, they've also...
They've also had to cut down. I understand what you are saying. Now, who are the politicians, for example? When it comes back to where we are starting from, the politicians. Who are the politicians? You are looking at people in the National Assembly, for example. How do you get into? He raised the issue of corruption, even intra-party corruption. How do you throw politicians, leaders up within the political party?
Yes.
Are the appropriate candidates put forward, or is the candidates with a deep war chest? What we have here is people paying for positions. If within a political party, for example,
it's all about the change.
It's you bring money, deep war chest. Yeah. So what happens is, if you are a private person, for example, you try to change your organization to make more money so that you can go pay people out there to get to the political class. So that is a challenge.
Mr. Shomi, let's say there was a proposal for an independent candidature into the electoral system. But would the Nigerian people, would the electorate be willing to buy into an individual who's standing alone with virtue? An individual who understands
if he has
service. Would they be willing to stand behind that person if he's not willing to dole out some perks?
Yeah, the truth of the matter is the ruling class have decided to shape people's thinking with poverty. And, you know, where you have low level of engagement, economic activities, you know, by the ordinary people, what you're likely going to have is people who think about their survival. Today, we have millions of our youths unemployed, walking down the street, so many of them without any hope of how they would survive. And therefore, the politicians are aware of that. All you need to do is distribute some money, you can win them to your side. But what we need to do now is to begin to look at how do we reorientate our people, you know, to understand that there are some basic values that we all need to subscribe to if we want Nigerian democracy to survive. Because if we fail to subscribe to those values, or we allowed, you know, the money bags to reorientate our people the way they have done currently, we'll continue to have a situation where even when you throw up in the independent candidacy, people will still continue, you know, to make the wrong choices. Don't forget, democracy is about numbers.
But you know, is it about democracy now, or it's about governance? Governance requires character.
Yeah, it's partly about democracy, it's partly about government, you know, because democracy itself is supposed to throw up those who will govern the country. And the process, you know, all the processes of democracy matters. All the processes matter. If you go through or you use the wrong process, what you end up is where we are currently. We need to look at what we are doing currently. We need to allow independent candidacy, but that on its own will not solve the problem without reorientating our people so that they understand that there are some values that underpin democracy. We also need to ensure that we make political offices less attractive to people in terms of remuneration.
We have always said that, but that is not about to happen, because those who are going to make it happen are the ones who are benefiting from it. So how are they going to say, okay, we're going to put forward a bill to have our pay cut, have our pay cut? It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen that way. But I honestly believe that the civil society organizations, you know, have responsibility in this aspect. We have seen how these same people can be moved. If you remember, in the days of when Jonathan, the former President Jonathan, was not made the acting president, civil society organizations, you know, forced the powers that be at the time to change their mind. We have so many examples. You remember the fuel subsidy under Jonathan? Civil society organizations forced, you know, the government to reduce it. So the civil society organizations have responsibility to ensure that people in position of authority in the National Assembly would have to effect the necessary change.
We've been joined by Malaki Ugumadu. Maybe you're way into this because you were actively involved in those incidents of the fuel subsidy, and indeed the...
So many of you did.
So we were all involved.
Okay, we were all involved. But now, when we talk about, he talked about the activities of the civil society and influencing the politicians. But there's a school of thought that believes that the former administration was, how do I put it, was arm twisted into certain deals that helped to jeopardize their service to the country, just so that they can get into power. There's a certain school of thought that has that. But the question of character and ethics and values and vision, how can all of this tie in? Would there be politicians, would there ever be politicians who would have the vision to see that political office becomes unattractive so that the country and the future can be served?
Well,
without necessarily having civil society on their case.
Well, I think that's a safe point to land, and the question is loaded. Now, this whole idea about civil society wasn't so much prominent at the beginning of our nationhood.